Now, I've got to start with you, Rowan. Why on earth would Queensland cut their vaccine order in half and bleat and moan continually about the Commonwealth's liability, they say, for the vaccine rollout if they're not even getting the doses in their state?
Well, because they're completely incompetent and they're all over the place. We've seen this handling of the pandemic. As I've repeatedly said, the single most important thing that Australia managed to do was closing the international borders way back over a year ago. Ever since then, it's been a comedy of errors. It's been worthy of Monty Python. We've seen borders shut. We've been people chasing this vaccine, then that vaccine, then realizing they got it wrong when the rest of the world suddenly realizes there's been a problem here. It has just been a comedy of errors all the way through, Peter. And I'm not sure how much longer the Australian public is going to sit there and remain convinced that the various chief medical officers and so on really are on top of their game. If you take Queensland, we've seen not only the chief medical officer there at one point saying that the only reason she was, for example, shutting schools, which didn't need to be shut for any medical reason, was to send a message as if she was some kind of PR guru. We had that character, the deputy premier there running around, who seems to spend most of his time thinking he's in student politics and swearing and using expletives to attack Scott Morrison. They're a shower. And when are the people of Australia going to sit back and go, hang on, we're really being not really treated very well here? I'd also draw attention to this story, which I first raised over 6 months ago, Peter, about ivermectin. Why aren't we looking at ivermectin, an Australian treatment, which around the rest of the world they're now sitting up and taking notice of? Peer-reviewed study after peer-reviewed study shows that it works. We could have been leading the world in this. We could have been the champions. Professor Thomas Borody, came up with this 6 months ago. We've ignored it. We've had nothing from any of our medical officers, nothing from Greg Hunt. Instead, they trip all over themselves, ordering and then not ordering and then backtracking on various vaccines. It's a shower. I'm sorry. Why can't we get serious? We've got a great treatment here, which we should be using along with the vaccines, and we just ignore it. No wonder people are kind of asking what on earth is going on.
Yeah, but you know, if we go back and look at the Queensland situation, we've got, obviously in Victoria, we've got a Premier who's still on leave, been there for a couple of months. We've got the woman, the police minister, who's supposed to be in charge of hotel quarantine. She's on leave too, has been for a couple of months, will be for a few more. You've got people that were running hotel quarantine stood down recently or sacked in Victoria for breaching their own rules and regulations. You've got issues in WA. You have, unfortunately, the situation, though, if there was an election held in Queensland, Victoria or WA this weekend, all of those premiers would be returned in a landslide. So where is the disconnect? I mean, punters are angry. The vaccines are not turning up. That there's been all of these delays with the rollouts. I'm sure they're angry about Queensland halving their vaccine order, but there's no political consequence, it would appear, for these Labor premiers.
Not yet. And I think that is because fear always comes first, an emotional response, a fight or flight sort of response. Fear has played very well for these Labor premiers, Peter, as well you know, and you more than anyone have done probably the best job in Australia of exposing the fiasco in Victoria and hotel quarantines and so on. And that's why so many people, Peter, are desperate for you to enter the political arena, as well you know. And the reason they want that is because people are slowly waking up to the fact that we are being run by a bunch of clowns. Our state premiers are a bunch of clowns. The only one you would give tuppence halfpenny for is Gladys Berejiklian. And the rest of them have used the fear to get themselves re-elected. And at some point, the public will wake up to that fact, and the earthquake, the tremor that will send through public's trust in their politicians is just going to be devastating. As I say, on so many errors, on so many fronts, it's just been a circus. And the one good thing we did was stopping closing the borders. And then when we closed the borders to India, everyone starts getting upset about that. We did the sensible thing, but we're going to have to realise that we're going to have to live with this thing. And at some point, we're going to have to rejoin the real world. And that's when, things are really going to get interesting.
I agree with you joining the real world. There's a task force out today to say, we've got to get to the point where we're about reopening our borders with a real plan. It's a task force, business, some other leaders, etc. It's led by former New South Wales Premier Mike Baird, and they want to put pressure on the Commonwealth, the states and the community, I guess, to adopt some sort of living with COVID strategy instead of our elimination goals, the zero COVID strategy that seems to have got out there in play. I guess the biggest issue I have, there's a lot of vaccine hesitancy with our most vulnerable, those over 50 and above, right? They are not vaccinated to the level that they should be because the only thing they're allowed to have is AstraZeneca. Yet we're already now starting to roll out Pfizer to the less vulnerable under the age of 50. Now, I'm sorry, but a 75-year-old who's a bit worried about AstraZeneca but would take Pfizer, to me, should be able to have Pfizer. And the 23-year-old who can only take Pfizer but is nowhere near as vulnerable as the older person can perhaps wait until we get more vaccine in October, as we're told we will. Why are we getting this so wrong? And why are we not allowing our most vulnerable older Australians to have a choice of which vaccine? I am absolutely confident if there was a choice, Rowan, these vaccination rates would go through the roof.
Of course they would, and that's why I said we should also have the choice of other treatments as well. And this is why you just got to go back to fundamental conservative principles, Peter, as I know you always do, as I always do. This matter was settled and debated after the Second World War, where it was decided that it was really important, the relationship between the patient and the GP or the doctor or the specialist or the surgeon or whoever. That was the sacred, that is the key fundamental to all health priorities, all health decisions. We have seen politicians wading into this and chief medical officers, many of whom, seriously were probably, the local GP down the road would know much more than many of them. They're just bureaucrats. You've got to get back to the basics of allowing patients and their GP or their specialist to decide what is the best thing for them and then allowing for that. And if we did that, if we offered treatments like ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine and others and the choice of vaccines, then you would find we wouldn't have a problem.